All right, welcome on in everyone to First CSP for another episode of the Sunday Special. This is a series that generally allows us to highlight first adjacent type CSPs and some other items from our larger collection, but it also allows us the opportunity, like it does today, to update First CSP episodes when there's new information. When we did episode 75 on Nashua Valley 230, we presented the first issues, the S1A, B, and C that we had in our collection, and that was the most current information at the time. But since then, there have been some new discoveries, thanks to some really hardworking collectors that were putting together a collection guide for the council, so a pictorial guide of all the CSPs that have existed for Nashua Valley, and that was Rob Kutz and Roy Wetherbee. They released that CSP guide April 7th, 2026, and what they found in their research is that there was a previously unknown first issue for the council. So let's head on over to the patch table so we can take a look on it. Obviously, big kudos and thanks go to Roy and Rob for all of their hard work in putting the information together. I will link the collecting guide that they put together in the description below if you would like to see the entire guide with pictures of the CSPs for Nashua Valley. But they did determine that this patch was the first CSP, so post 1970 CSP that the council actually produced. What they found was well into the 70s, they still had stock of their red and whites, and so they were using those for a long time before they ended up producing a CSP. This is not all that different from many other councils of the time. Just to kind of show the difference, this is a traditional red and white. I don't happen to have a Nashua Valley red and white, but this is a Birmingham area red and white. You can see the difference. It's going to have a cut edge. It does not have the rolled edge, and so this would be a red and white strip. This would be an actual council shoulder patch. We have also seen councils that have produced council shoulder patches that mimic the former red and whites. One of the great examples is Central New Jersey, and that council was formed in 1999, so well after red and whites were no longer around and we were all using CSPs at that point. They decided to kind of honor the history of scouting and red and whites by making their first issue look similar. And Nashua Valley's kind of also bridged that gap as well. I did dialogue back and forth with Rob to try and ask through their research, did they have an estimate of when they thought this might have been produced? And they were coming down with an estimate of around 1979. They believe that this was produced. Now, one challenge that this now provides collectors is determining how do you refer to this patch. Rob and Roy decided to list it in their guide as a T0, and I think there's certainly a great argument for that. I would suggest one slight modification that I think helps tell the story of this patch. When we look at how CSPs have been cataloged, there's a few prior to 1970 that have always been included in the CSP guide that were listed as first issues, like a TA1 or whatnot, and collecting guide authors have chosen not to change those. There's really only a handful of those. And then beyond that, patches that are CSP-like that have been found later that existed prior to 1970 have been listed as less than one value, decimal values, T0.5, T0.6. The South Florida Pre-CSP is a great example of this. The Yucca domes are a great example of this. So with that notation, it would not make sense to have this patch have a value less than 1, a decimal value. That generally is indicating prior to 1970. We do believe that this is post 1970. Obviously, Rob and Roy think around 1979. So we would have a value generally greater than 1. We do have a system that collecting guide authors have created when you're inserting a patch that was formerly not known, but allows you to insert the patch without changing the numerical values of the rest of the patches, and that is the colon system. Now, what we've never had is an unknown patch come out and be the first. I think the colon notation is great to allow collectors to know that this was found later. It was not originally known. I really like Rob and Roy's idea of the T0, but what I would generally recommend or be an advocate for is listing this as a T0:1. So you know that this actually precedes what we originally thought was the first issue, is that S1A. But the colon notation, in addition to the T0, shows us that this was a later patch found and inserted. And I think it kind of bridges the gap between the different ways you could try and label this in a collecting guide. So my vote is for the T0:1. Obviously, collectors and collecting guide authors in general will come to some consensus moving forward. This is all very new information at this point. Again, it was released essentially a week ago, and we're very fortunate to be able to bring it to you here on the channel. Really excited. I should say a week ago at the time of this filming. You guys will see it a little bit later, but not too much. And so we'll see where it shakes out. But this is now a newly defined first issue for Nashua Valley, and would come before what was previously listed as the S1A. I do have that episode 75. If you've not seen it and want to, I will make sure it's linked at the card that shows at the end of this video. But always exciting news. You know, here we are decades later and still finding new information. You never know what's going to show up in collecting. It's always kind of exciting, and we're glad to share it with you. Hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of the Sunday Special and this update to Nashua Valley. We'll be back again every single day and tomorrow with a new episode of First CSP. We hope to see you for that. But until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.